Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing this drawing of Orlando Bloom as Legolas in The Lord of the Rings. Some people requested this drawing, so here it is. I used my usual tools, which I'm going to be talking about during the video. So let's have a look. First, of course, I'm starting with a graphite pencil. It's a Staedtler graphite pencil that I normally use for sketching. And I'm also going to be talking about the Legolas's character and the movies and some of the differences between the movies and the book, if I find the time during the video. I'm not going to make it too long. The drawing itself in real time was under 3 hours, so it's not a very complex drawing, but the portrait itself is a little bit challenging because of some of the shadows. Right now I'm using a vine charcoal stick, and I'm going to be using that to cover the background. I'm trying to create an out of focus blurry background, and when you have these out of focus backgrounds you often have these lighter circles. That's where the light is coming through, maybe through the branches or some other objects, who knows. But the key here is to blend everything very smoothly and to avoid having too much contrast in there and too much value, so that it wouldn't be too distracting, and also too much texture. So I want it kind of blurry so that the viewer could immediately be drawn to my main subject, which is going to be Orlando as Legolas. I'm drawing this character because I really like the movies in spite of their flaws. I think that in The Lord of the Rings, and I've talked about this a few times before, Peter Jackson did a decent job in comparison to The Hobbit, which I really don't like. And sadly, Legolas also appears in The Hobbit, even though he has no business being there, I mean in the Hobbit movies. Right now I'm working on the eyes, and I'm starting to work with my charcoal pencils. These are woodless charcoal pencils, and as you can see I'm going to leave this little white circle for the reflection, this highlight in the eye, and I'm going to shade and draw all around it, and once I do that it'll stand out and the reflection in the eye will look shiny. This is what I normally do in all of the portraits when there is a reflection in the eye. So as you can see, I shaded the entire eye, and now that white space really stands out. And it's going to stand out even more, hopefully, once I shade the entire face. And you can see that I did a lot of the shading with my Tortillion, which I also use as a drawing tool when there's a little bit of charcoal on it. I use it to draw some of these lighter lines where I don't want as much value or as much texture. And also the pencils that I'm using, a lot of people ask about the brands. I often deliberately don't talk about the brands because I think they're irrelevant. I just prefer woodless charcoal pencils because they're easier to sharpen, and that's about it. That's pretty much the only reason why I use these woodless charcoal pencils. But you can use any charcoal pencils that you can find. I mean, the brands that are available locally in my country won't be the ones that you will be able to find, and it really doesn't matter. If you're worried about the brands, chances are you're not very serious about drawing. You just have to pick up any pencil that you have at home and start drawing. That's my biggest drawing tip that I keep repeating, and some people will sadly ignore it and ask me about magic pencils that I'm using, or the magic paper that they believe that I'm using. The paper is irrelevant, and so are the pencils. Just forget about it and practice. So you can see that I use my vine charcoal to shade this area here around the eye on the right, because it's going to be, because it's in the shadow, the eye socket is a little bit darker, and the right side of the face, or his left side of the face, is going to be darker than the other one because of the light source which is coming from the left. So I'm going to try to create as much contrast as possible from between the light side and the shadow side of the face. Maybe not too much, but I will want the left side to be a lot lighter than the right one. And there are the shadows are kind of complex here because there's a lot of reflected light and light coming from other angles, so it's not going to be that easy. But the thing about shadows is that even though they make a portrait more challenging in terms of achieving likeness, at the same time, if you get them right, they can make your drawing look a lot more realistic, because they can help you create an illusion of volume and depth. So a few shadows here and there really go a long way in creating depth in your character. But as you can see in the background, I've covered some of it with vine charcoal, and I'm going to be refining it a little bit later. And I'm working on shading the face using my pencils, but at the same time I'm using brushes to spread the charcoal gently without creating too much texture. And I also need a little bit of contrast between the hair here and the background. But one thing that you'll see, and I probably should mention that now, is that even though I normally insist on clean edges between the main subject and the background, here I'm going to leave this edge around the top of his head and the hair just a little bit blurrier, and that's because his light hair has probably a lot of these smaller flyaway hairs, so to make the hair look even more realistic, I'm going to make the edge just a little bit less defined, just a little bit less clean, and hopefully that'll give me a realistic look of that hair, because the hair consists of many smaller hairs, and when you look at it from a distance, it doesn't really look like a clean edge, if that makes sense. I'm moving on to the mouth. So I talked a little bit about the differences between the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies. I thought that the Lord of the Rings movies had their flaws, but they were better mostly because Peter Jackson and the people who made it stuck to their reference material, and they had great reference material, so why not use it, obviously. But as for the character of Legolas and elves in general, I thought that the casting was good, and obviously the actors are pretty good, but the style and the way of grooming, I found it a little bit overly feminine, or effeminate, if you like. I think that all of the elves in the movies, both the Lord of the Rings and especially the Hobbit, were portrayed almost like metrosexuals, like men who worry too much about their appearance and their hair and clothes and things like that. It's almost as if the makers of the movie wanted to suggest that these higher, perfect men are all effeminate, or are supposed to be effeminate. That's not really the way that they were described in the books. Legolas, as well as many other elvish characters, were described as quite masculine. So even though he may have had a hair like that, I think that the appearance was a little bit too girly and a little bit too well groomed, especially for a warrior. So that's one of the things that I had a problem with, even though I think generally the costumes and visually the movie looks pretty good, but I just thought that the elves looked kind of girly in both of the movies. Orlando has an interesting face to draw. He has a lot of these pretty boy features. He is not an overly masculine character. Even though we can't really know what these actors are really like in real life, maybe they're the complete opposite of what they're portrayed in the movies and when they give interviews. So we can't really know anything about that. My favorite movies, Orlando's movies, were Pirates of the Caribbean. Where he isn't even the main character, I guess. That would be Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow. Although you could argue about that. He has some braids here on the sides, but I didn't put in too much work. I didn't make it overly complicated. I just made some suggestions of braided hair on the sides. And you can see how nicely I shaded the right side of the face and the hair, so it's a lot darker now. So the thing is that you need to understand that even though his hair is blonde in the movies, I'm not going to be able to make it all white. It depends on the light source. And now you can see that I'm pulling these highlights on the top of the head where the hair will appear lighter because of the light source. And I also cleaned up some of the other highlights on the face just to refine the facial features a little bit more. I think I did a good job on Orlando's face, and I'm almost ready to move on to the background, and I'm going to continue working with vine charcoal, using brushes and my fingers to blend it. And I'm also going to use a little bit of charcoal pencil here and there to create some variation in the background, maybe some suggestions of darker areas. It's all blurry and out of focus, so it doesn't really matter if there's no detail that we can discern. What I really wanted to achieve with that background on the right is to have a little bit of contrast with the lighter parts of his hair and the ear. So value contrast is needed. And I'm adding in some of these darker areas here using my soft charcoal pencil. And now I'm back to using the medium charcoal pencil, where I'm going to do a little bit more work to separate this here into segments and also start working on his armor. So here again I used a little bit of soft charcoal pencil for some of these darker areas. So you can see how I'm approaching this. I'm basically trying to draw in the darkest bits, and just to create some lines that suggest the shape and the flow of the hair. If I were drawing a comic, that's where I would stop. I would just leave it like that, black and white, but because I'm doing a realistic drawing, I'm going to start blending and creating midtones, and then I'm going to have to go back and pull some highlights. So you can see here on his shoulder I created something that looks like armor, and because the shoulders and the armor that's covering them is round, I left the middle slightly lighter, and I'm going to refine their appearance a little bit so that the shape can be, so that I can refine their shape a little bit. I added some more value to the face, as you can see on the right, because I wasn't really happy with the amount of contrast between the light side and the shadow side. And now I'm doing some more additional work on the hair. In addition to my charcoal pencils, I also used a black colored pencil for some of the details and some of the shading. And as always, as I always mention, it's important to use the black colored pencil on top of the charcoal pencil because it doesn't work the other way around. So here I'm pulling some highlights on this armor so that it appears like it's made out of metal. And just adding a little bit more value to the face. So I'm almost done with the drawing, as you can see. I'm just going to soften this transition here a little bit. I feel like it's a little bit too sharp, too strong. Now I'm going to be removing this tape and finishing the drawing, and then I'm going to spray it with a fixative, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like. So here it is. I'm just putting down some finishing touches before I sign it. It's already been sprayed with a fixative, and I'm not going to fidget with it too much. It's pretty much as detailed as I wanted it to be, so I'm just going to wrap it up and sign the drawing here. And there it is. I'm going to move it around a little bit so that you can see all of it, and also zoom in so that you can see more of the detail and the shading that I did on the face. And I zoomed out, so there it is. That's my drawing of Orlando Bloom as Legolas. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you didn't, and don't forget to check out my other videos. Bye.